Everyone, the purpose of this video is to take a moment to talk about an upcoming assignment that you have, which is to create and submit a data figure from your pilot experiment. So you may have noticed this assignment in Canvas. So here, if we scroll down in Canvas, you'll see due in mid-October, we've got a pilot data figure. So there's some rubric and instructions here. But as you look through these, you may find that you still have some questions about the process of creating your figure. So let's talk about this for a moment. So your goal with this assignment and with creating scientific figures in general is to create a clear standalone visual summary of your results. And the idea is that you want your readers to be able to get the gist of your results without necessarily having to dive all of the way into the written results. So oftentimes when I'm looking through a paper, rather than reading the entire paper front to back, I open the paper up and I skim it, and the first thing that I do is I look at the figures and I scrutinize them. So when I do that, I want to be able to understand what the experiment was all about and draw my own conclusions directly from the figure, before deciding whether or not it's worth my time to read through the rest of the paper. So our goal is to create figures that will meet that standard. So how do you get started with this process? My general workflow for creating figures is basically what's outlined here. So the first step is always to plot your data. So you need to look at your data, figure out the appropriate type of plot based on the data that you've collected. Make sure your data are organized and they're in a format where you can easily upload them to R, and then generate your plot. And it may take a little while to tweak and polish your plot to get a plot that is publication ready. Once you have that plot together, your next step is going to be to do a statistical analysis for that plot. So you're going to want to calculate means and standard deviations just to get an idea of the center and spread for your data and get a sense of the overall pattern. And then think about the type of data that you're working with and what type of statistical comparison is the most appropriate. So is it a t-test, some type of analysis of variance, or is it some type of regression? And many types of data get to be fairly complex, and it can become challenging to figure out what comparison is the most appropriate. So if you're really feeling stuck on this, get help. Once you've done your statistical analysis and you have your figure generated, now you're in a good position to go ahead and write your figure caption. So figure captions follow a fairly systematic formula, and here are the components that your figures should include. So you're going to need to have a figure number, and then a title sentence that summarizes what that figure shows. Along with that, you need to be specific about what different elements in the plot are intended to represent. So, for example, if you have a point that has error bars coming off of it, are those error bars representative of the standard deviation or the standard error? Or are they something else? And are we looking at a summary of the mean or a summary of the median? Along with that, if it's a box plot, what do the box plot elements represent? All of that can vary, so you need to be specific about what your figure includes. Along with that, you need to provide a very brief summary of how the data in the figure were collected. If your reader wanted to know more about how the data were collected, they'd go back through and actually read your methods. But they need to have some idea of what was involved in producing the data that are in the figure. So just a 1 or 2 sentence summary at the most. Along with that, you need to make sure that any symbols or acronyms that are used are defined. So if you have gray triangles, what do those gray triangles mean? And that can sometimes appear in a figure legend rather than in the caption, but make sure that that information is somewhere so your reader knows how to interpret your figure. And then along with that, for this course, we'd like you to also include a brief take-home message in your figure legend. So this is a sentence that essentially summarizes what the major finding is that you want us to take away from that figure. What did you observe? Were there no differences across your treatments? Were all your treatments similar? Or did something that you add have a major effect that caused some kind of increase in one group compared to another? Something of that nature. And that's usually also a great place to include the statistical comparison that you've conducted to validate the conclusion that you've reached. And along with all of that, it's also important to give an indicator of your sample sizes. And that, again, can be done in a range of different ways, but it should be included somewhere with your figure. So all things together, then, with a figure, it's possible to get the essence of an experiment in one concise visual summary. So I wanted to give you one example of this, and Dr. Burke has also provided a couple of examples in the pilot figure assignment, and you can also go back to your primary research papers and look at some other examples, and it's worth it to take a little bit of time to critique those examples and see what was done well and what was done poorly. So with this particular figure from one of my papers, if we look through this figure caption, this is figure 4. So this figure shows brood and worker production during nest development. And in panel A, the upper panel here, I've illustrated the number of eggs that are present in different nest types across the early stages of nest founding before larval development started. And this is in small colonies with ant queens. And so here I note that the numbers that were significantly different between nest types are indicated by different letters to the right of the lines. So my statistical comparison is conducted here at the end point of this study. And I've also listed my sample sizes. And then in part B, what I'm showing are the mean number of workers per nest at day 50 that were produced by my different treatments in this experiment. So this figure's okay, but it could stand to be improved in certain ways. And so you can probably start to think of some improvements. Just to give one small example, I have recommended against using bar plots, so it'd be much better to actually use a box plot for panel B. And there's also some other statistical information and some conclusions that are missing from this figure legend. So after you've created your figure, also budget a little bit of time to just read through and double check and make sure that you have all the relevant information. And on Canvas, to help you with this, if you go to the Canvas homepage and you go to the Assigned Readings page, what you'll discover is we're starting to build in a set of checklists for you as you go through and complete different parts of your paper. And so we're providing a figure formatting reference and checklist among those. So if you take a look through these, there are some guidelines again here you can just read through that should reiterate what I've covered in this video. And then the second page is going to be an extensive checklist just to verify that you have all the pieces of information where they need to be and that your figure is as excellent and clear as possible. So hopefully that helps you work your way through the figure creation workflow process. Doing this with your pilot figure will be very helpful for preparing for creating figures for your main paper as well. And again, as I noted, there's a lot of moving pieces to this process, and many of the steps depend on the nature of the data that you've collected. So if you run into any major roadblocks while you're working on your figures, do get in touch with myself and Dr. Burke so we can help you figure out the most appropriate approach to work with your data.